Welcome back to our series on How Does God Really See You? In the first episode, we discussed that God calls us his friends and that God the Father has adopted us as his own sons and daughters. We mentioned that many times those two ways that God sees us are where many times we stop exploring this topic. Last week, we started talking about how Jesus sees us as expressed in the Old Testament Song of Solomon by seeing what the word in Hebrew that we translate to beloved really means. We found that the way Jesus sees and loves us is a little different than the way the Father sees and loves us. It is more passionate and describes similarly to the intensity of boiling water. Now today, let's fast forward to the New Testament. Several of the writers in the New Testament also use the word beloved to describe how Jesus sees us, and also as they write to each other about how they see each other. The Apostle John in particular seems to use this term frequently. Now the Greek word usually translated beloved in the New Testament is the word agapeo. It means to love, take pleasure in, long for, and esteem. Commentaries on these verses tell us things like agapeo is always defined by God. It's a type of perfect love initiated by God. It involves his choosing and selection of us. And when this word was used between people, it refers to Christ living his life, love, through the believers towards each other. This type of love is a God type of love. To be the beloved is to be loved perfectly by God. To be the beloved is to be what God prefers. Did you know that God prefers you just as you are? Now sure, he's committed to your growth as you progress through your life, but he prefers you now. Not when you're perfect, not when you keep all the rules. He prefers you. This New Testament description of what it means to be the beloved means that God chose you to be the recipient of his love. We are the recipient of Jesus' perfect love towards us. Not because we earned it, not even because we chose to follow Jesus. Now remember, Scripture says he chose us while we were still in opposition to him. Romans 5:8. To be the beloved means that he takes pleasure in you. He longs for you. He esteems you. How often do we feel like God takes pleasure in us just for who we are? How often do we feel like he longs for us or esteems us? I would take a guess that you, like me, don't really feel these things as much as maybe Jesus feels them towards you. We see the times we fail. We see all of our weaknesses and mistakes. So therefore, we often become those failures, weak in our own eyes, and the mistakes that we see. But where in Scripture does God give us permission to define who we are? Well, nowhere. To borrow a story in Scripture from our first episode, the potter gets to tell the pot what it is. The pot has no authority to define itself. According to the definition of beloved in the New Testament, agapeo, Jesus sovereignly chose us and therefore gets to sovereignly define what his love, the beloved, actually is. He made us. He chose us, and he loves us. And he defines us by showing us what he feels and what he thinks about us. We don't have a say in it. Our challenge is to read the Scriptures, what Jesus actually says about us, and choose to believe it, even if we don't understand it, and let it change our hearts and how we see ourselves. If Jesus sees us the way Scripture says, then maybe we should try to believe it too. How many of our struggles would completely disappear from our lives if we actually believed the Maker of the universe really sees us this way? Would the enemy of our souls ever be able to convince us that we're worthless? if we really believed how Jesus chooses to see us? Would our accuser ever be able to convince us that we aren't good enough, or make us feel rejected, if we really believed that we are Jesus' beloved? I encourage you to look through these portions of Scripture this week and dare to believe them. And we'll see you next week as we conclude our series on how does God really see us.